Bigfoot Hotspot for your first free downloadable book and a 30-day trial. Told you about the guy that sent me the email, how we need to, he talked about how we need to, something like the title of the email was How to Grow Your Audience. And it was a Bigfoot researcher, and he said we need to start having more bigger names on the show. And coincidentally, his name was in the top 10 of who we need to have on the show. And I was just laughing. I was just like, really?
It's funny. There's kind of a double thing here. I was just thinking, that the show we didn't design it for promoting Bigfoot hunters necessarily. It's about getting people's stories out to the public. But then I thought, oh, wait a minute, it's our show, so I can plug my books on here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, man.
Yeah, by the way, if anybody wants to find my books, they're on Amazon.com, Notes from the Field, Tracking North America Sasquatch, Haunted Valley, and In Search of the Unknown. We get that asked once in a while, so I probably should say it more often, but that's where they are.
It's funny, when we first started the show, I remember when Woody and I first started it, one of the reasons why we started it was I was so tired of listening to the other Bigfoot shows. And if you go listen to all the other Bigfoot shows, they have the same person over and over and over and over again. And it's the same researcher on every show. I just wanted to hear people's accounts like Woody and I's. I didn't really want to, I hate to sound like a dick. It's not like we couldn't get Bigfoot researchers. I'm sure we could, or, maybe we couldn't. I don't know. But we're not really trying, you know what I mean? It's not really.
Well, and occasionally we do. Like we've had, Bear and Coonbo, Bob Garrett, and that's probably better than some of the people who are more well-known out there. I'm more than certain of that fact.
Those guys are the black sheep of the Bigfoot community, just like you and I.
Yeah. Well, the people that got the big names this person is alluding to are really, in my opinion, full of hot air in most cases. And really not worth our time to put on our show. Yeah.
Why not just send me an email and just say, hey, I'd like to be on your show. I don't need a breakdown of the top 10 of the show and include your name in the top 10. Why not just say, hey, I like the show, fellas. I'd like to come on, and we'd have you on. You know what I mean?
It's another one of those, it's like some of the current stuff out there where the people just, their show is all about trying to convince the audience that they're somebody important.
I got news for everyone. There's no one important in this community.
That's right.
Including us, you know what I mean? It's like no one's really above anything.
Oh, yeah. I've told people before, I've done this for more than 4 decades, and there's all these people that claim they're experts. I've done this longer than most people, and I'm far from an expert. I would never consider myself an expert. That's why it's still an unknown.
There's stuff that still drives me nuts when I listen to other shows, because I actually do listen to a lot of other shows. There's a lot of things that drive me crazy, but I still listen to a lot of other shows. And I was telling you about the rock throwing thing on the other. I won't name the show, but I was just.
I get a chuckle just thinking about that.
Yeah. So on this other show, again, I won't mention the show, but this guy had been a researcher forever, and they were asking him, "What do you think Sasquatch?" It has been reported that they tend to throw rocks at people. They were asking him, do you think that's playful behavior? Do you think that's a threatening behavior? What is your take on it? And I was laughing at his answer. He said, well, it depends on the size of rock they're throwing at you. If it's a small rock, it's playful behavior. If it's a large rock, it's threatening behavior. And I'm thinking, it's not like Sasquatch has rocks in his pockets and, he's going to pull ones out of his left. It's whatever is at the feet of the Sasquatch at the time, I would imagine.
It's like you said earlier, if the pockets on the left, these are the playful rocks, the ones on the right pocket are the aggressive ones. Screams of flute player to me.
It just made me laugh. It's just like, really? Do they have a stash of rocks? And depending on the type of mood they're in, they're going to throw big rocks or small rocks at you. You don't think for 2 seconds it has to do with the type of rocks that are at their feet at the moment?
And what do they do if they don't have rocks?
Yeah, how would you describe that behavior then? You know what I mean?
Some of the things people come up with just amaze me. Just when I thought I've heard everything, somebody will come up with something new.
Yeah, there seems to be lacking some common sense, I think, in a lot in this field, with regard to... and again, with this field, what's funny is when people can't figure things out, or there's no common sense to it,
they'll make up
people
a
just start making crap up.
explanation. Yeah, that's exactly it.
They start coming up with weird crap that they used to describe their behavior. It's just like, really?
I know. I think it has more to do with the psychology of humans than it does the Sasquatch.
Well, I know we were going to go into more on the behaviors. Maybe we could go into that next week and throw our 2 cents in.
Right.
Which is actually worth $35 and change, but. For people listening to the show, you can listen to the show on iTunes. You can download the app Stitcher. We're on just about every podcast player out there, more than just YouTube. I know it takes me a little while to upload it to YouTube, and I, tend to get a lot of angry emails about why it's not on YouTube.
Yeah, I think people just don't understand, like we were talking earlier, just the technicalities and the time it takes to do some of these things. And they don't understand that, we work jobs and, we're not independently wealthy or anything like that. Like we were, again, talking earlier about my being an author. Well, I haven't sold millions of copies yet, so I can't live in leisure. I have to go work a job just like everybody else. and you do too, of course. So, and we don't make any money from this show. And this is just out of our own enjoyment, talking to people who've had encounters and sharing ours with them and vice versa. So.
You're not driving a Ferrari out there in the Hollywood Hills?
Yeah, people have to have a little patience with us, doing this.
Yeah, and I'll try and get it up on YouTube a little bit quicker, but it just takes a little bit of time because I have to reformat it to video format for YouTube. That's why it takes so much longer to transfer it. But be patient if it's on YouTube, but there's other ways to listen besides just beyond YouTube. So, well, tonight we're supposed to have Bob Garrett on, and Bob's actually pretty sick with the flu. Spoke to him yesterday, and he's not doing so good. So if you're out there listening,
terrible.
Bob, it sounded really bad. So if you're out there listening, Bob, we hope you get well. And take care of yourself and drink lots of fluids. I hope you get well soon.
He will be back on sometime.
Yeah, hopefully we can get him next week. Hopefully we can get him back on next week.
Yeah, well, let's hope he's better by then.
Yeah, of course.
So our guest tonight is Pam. She's going to tell us about her account back in 1972 in Arkansas.
Yeah, it sounded more like a dogman encounter. Or what people call
and she actually had a really good drawing that she made of what she saw, and it's exactly what it looked like.
Yeah. We got to come up with a better name besides Dogman.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll just say Type 3.
Yeah, we can go with Type. Well, Dogman sounds more sexy than Type 3.
That's true. We'll figure something out.
We'll figure it out.
The baboon.
We'll get back to it. Yeah, baboon.
We'll get back to you folks on that one.
We'll work on that one. We'll draw it up in the sand and get back to you on it. All right, well, let's go ahead and bring Pam on. Thanks so much for coming on. We really do appreciate it.
No problem.
Well, let's go into your account, Pam. Now, this was in 1972, correct?
Yes, it was.
Tell us, what were you doing prior to the incident that happened? Just sort of, tell us about that day and sort of lead us into the events as they unfolded.
Okay, well, we had been down to Arkansas a couple of times previously and in the Ozarks area and visited. We knew there was this big lake project about to open up. They had flooded this big valley and it was going to be just a stunning recreational area. So we'd heard that they started it in 1966 and it took them that long to complete it. It was just really huge and it was called Beaver Lake Project. So we decided we were going to go down there for maybe 4 days and check it out. We were Army brats, so we traveled all the time, and we would take weekend trips and just jump in the Volkswagen van and, find a nice stream and camp there. My brother was 16. He was going to go with us. I had a 2-month-old and a 14-month-old at the time. My husband was going to do all the driving in this 67 or 68 Volkswagen van. I can't remember which it was. But we drove down there. It was a long day. We were coming out of Leavenworth, Kansas. We got down there, and the park was pretty empty. It had just opened, and I believe we were one of the first people to sign into a campsite. That's what the ranger was telling us. We found this site, and either of you guys been to the Ozarks, but there were a lot of these like sandstone, rocky outcroppings. And in this one outcropping area, it was kind of like a little horseshoe. They'd built this cul-de-sac with 4 little campsites in it, right in this rocky wall area. And we thought, wow, this is just perfect. You know, no one's around. There's a mile or two between us and anything. So we pulled in there, and it was afternoon. We ate a little lunch, and my brother was going to sleep in a little pup tent right outside the van, and the babies were sleeping up on the back cover over the engine compartment. There was a ledge, and I was going to sleep on the back seat, and my husband was going to lay on the van floor, and that was our camping rig. So we got there, we ate a little bit, wandered around the campsite. This campsite was in a horseshoe, and where we were parked, we would have been, if you're looking at the horseshoe, as starting on the bottom left, going up into an arc and ending on the bottom right. We were on the bottom left leg of this horseshoe, and the road went right straight in the middle of it. So our site was uphill from the second site, which was downhill from us by about 20 feet. So we were up on a ledge, and then there was a site down below us, and then the road, and then two sites over on the other side by the right leg of this horseshoe. They cleared it out pretty good, but there was a good line of small brush between us and the second campsite, the one below us. And so we parked in the upper one. I would say we were about 10 to 15 feet from the left leg of that horseshoe wall. There was only about 10 feet between where the van was parked and that wall. And then as the wall ran up the horseshoe, if you followed the horseshoe shape to the highest peak, highest arch of the horseshoe, that would be where the road ended. We walked around there and we checked it out. We thought it was really beautiful area. Up on the top of that ridge were some pretty good-sized trees. I would think it was over 50 feet high. I would say it had to be over 50 feet tall. But there were some pretty good trees up there, and you really couldn't see past anything on the ridge. There earlier, we saw there was a really good swimming spot over by the dam. So the guys wanted to go swimming. And that's when this began to be the the National Lampoon Ozarks vacation, you could say. Everything that could go wrong went wrong. They jumped in to swim. My brother realized that this, because of the heavy flooding they'd just had, there was a really strong undercurrent. And he came back to shore right away. He said he had a horrible time just getting back. And so my husband was just swimming like crazy farther out. And he didn't realize, he had no idea that he was going to have a horrible time coming back. And we couldn't get his attention, so we honked the horn on the van, and he saw us, and we waved him back, so he started coming back. And long story short, he couldn't make it back. It was like swimming in an endless pool, and he went under. My brother got out far enough with a big long tree branch to catch him and to get him to come up and grab onto it, pulled him back to shore. And he was completely waterlogged. I mean, he was just coughing and puking up water. And so we thought, well, the vacation's over. Jumped in the van, went to the ranger station. They told us to go to Rogers, Arkansas, where they had a small hospital. So we got there, and sure enough, he had pneumonia, and he was supposed to stay there overnight, but he wouldn't do it. He didn't want to ruin the vacation. So we stayed there for a few hours, and it was starting to get to be around late supper time, so we couldn't talk him into staying, went back to the campsite, and we were told by the doctors to watch him for the next 48 hours, and he was just going to sleep, and that Bruce and I would take shifts and watch him, as we'd check on him all night and wake him up every 3 or 4 hours. We got to the campsite, and it was getting dusk, and we ate sandwiches and beans on the campfire, and he was just out. My husband was just passed out in a sleeping bag on the van floor. A few minutes after we got done eating and cleaned up, a pickup truck pulling a little pop-up trailer came into the campsite, and we just all looked at each other and went, how did they even find this site? We thought we were out there all by ourselves, and here they came. But they pulled into that campsite that was down below us. And it was about a 20-foot drop to get down there. Sitting in our van looking down, I could see the top of their truck over the brush, if I looked over the brush. This family with 2 little kids, man and woman, got out, and they used there campering, and they ate, and they popped up their trailer, and we were all pretty quiet. I was getting the kids to sleep, and husband was passed out ill on the floor. He was in bad shape. And my brother and I said we were exhausted. As soon as it got dark, he crawled into the pup tent. And so I closed everything down. We got it all quiet, and I lay down on that back seat with my head towards those two opening doors on the van. I kept awake and checked on my husband, woke him up, and he got up and coughed and drank water and shivered and went back to sleep. And I woke my brother, went out there and said, Bruce, it's your turn. I got to get some sleep. So he got in and sat in the passenger seat, and I went to sleep. And around 3:30, it couldn't have been more than a half an hour, I laid down, and then I heard a whole bunch of animal sounds that coming off the ridge up above us. Strange. First I thought it was coyotes. I thought, well, there's a bunch of coyotes up there, because there was these small yips and howls. Actually, at one point, it sounded like something was killing a rabbit. And there was a little screaming, and it made me edgy. But I laid back down. I thought, well, it's 3 a.m. That's when creatures do their thing. And I just tried not to think about it. And I was just about to drift off to sleep. And that's when there was this tremendous sound. I mean, a huge crashing bang hit the side of the van right by my head. I mean, I sat bolt upright. I just, you're in that half asleep state, and then all of a sudden you sit up and your brain tries to paint the picture. What was that? I remember to this day exactly what I pictured was great big giant softball, which would have been thrown at the van at about 100 miles an hour by a pitcher, and it would have hit. That's about how hard it sounded. And I don't know. I thought before maybe it was just because I was in that almost asleep stage that it sounded louder. But my husband, who had been full out, passed out, feverish, he jumped to his feet in that van. And he jumped to a bent over stance. And my brother, I heard the van door swing open. He jumped in that car so fast from the pup tent, and we all just sat there staring at each other. And a good 30 seconds, just like, did we all hear that? Did we really hear that? And my brother was looking out the front window. He got up into the front seat. He looked out the window, and we're looking out side windows, and it's just pretty dark out. I mean, it was almost light enough where you could see. I'd say you could see 10 feet behind the van. You could see around a little bit because our eyes were pretty good adjusted being asleep. And we just sat there, and I mean, my heart was in my throat because you're trying to picture what would do that. And then I remember my brother looking down at the campsite next to us. He must have thought, he was thinking, what are those people doing? He must have thought one of them came up there and banged on and then ran away or something. I don't know, but he kept looking down there, and I said, are those people awake? And he didn't say anything, and we're just sitting there, all of us just kind of shaking. And then my brother said that there was something moving in the rearview mirror. He was sitting in the passenger seat, and he happened to look in the rearview mirror, and he said, there's something moving out there. And I mean, all of us just spun to the back window, and I remember seeing just a large black shadow, just blacker than the rest of the surroundings, shot from left to right from the back of the van. Just a huge passing cloud almost. It was that fast. And it was between 15, 20 feet behind the van, and I would say it was about a third of the way to that rock wall. Between the van and the rock wall, it was about a third of the way to that rock wall. And it was just on the edge of what you could see, where there was a difference between the light and dark from what you could see in the glow in the sky. And it just shot. We saw it go to the right and down. I don't know how to explain it or else maybe it bent down, but we knew it was going down the hill towards that other campsite. And all three of us said, did you see that? Did you see that? I said, yeah, what was it? I don't know. And my brother was still looking out on the top of that camper, and he says, I think we went down there to the camper. And we sat absolutely still. We were afraid we were going to wake up the kids, so we didn't say anything. We were just sitting there, and I remember just getting really just getting the jitters, just really getting jittery. the kids actually started to wake up and stir. And I was like, oh, not a good time, come on, go back to sleep, and cajoled them back to sleep. They immediately went right back to sleep. I was trying to keep my head low. I didn't want it, whatever was out there, to see that I was up and had my head up. My brother said, hey, those people down there, they're moving around. And my husband peeked out the window and he said, are you sure it's them? And I said, who else would it be, And then we saw a little flashlight come on, and we saw some movement inside how you can see a light through the tent top, and we saw people moving, and then we couldn't see anybody really, but we could hear them. They were whispering and scuffling around a little bit, and they got into their pickup truck. I remember the man talking to the little kids and saying, get in. And they got in this pickup truck, and they started picking things up around the trailer, and I think he was actually unhooking the trailer, now that I think about it, because I don't think they unhooked it when they pulled in. I think they just popped it up. And you heard those little people moving around, putting things away sounds, little crunches and bangs and everything, but no lights, just that one little flashlight. I don't even remember seeing if a light came on in the truck, actually. We talked about it later, and we figured it was actually probably less than 10 minutes, and all of a sudden they just pulled out. They turned their lights on, and they just floored it out of there. They left the camper there, and they left. They were flying down the road. And that's when we were all sitting there going, oh. The thought actually went across my mind that maybe they had had some kind of domestic altercation, like maybe they had gotten a fight. Maybe they had come up and maybe thrown something at our van or something, because now they're mad and they're going to pull out. I was just trying to paint a picture that made sense here. Right about then, my husband and my brother Bruce, just out of the blue, opened up the doors and got out. And I was just like, okay, they must think the same thing, that it was those people and stuff. But they stood around the side of the van by the doors where that huge sound came. And they were asking me, where do you think it hit? And I pointed, right here, right by my head, right by the opening door. And they searched and searched. They had the inside van light on. We didn't want to wake the kids, but they had it on, and they were looking with a flashlight, and we could not find one dent, not one scratch, nothing on that van. Honestly, we expected, like I said before, a softball-sized dent. It was impossible that there was no dent on that van. They were standing there maybe 2-3 minutes, so maybe 15 minutes after those people left, maybe that long total. And my brother was saying, jokingly, that maybe there was a hillbilly that was kind of mad about the park being open, because we'd heard there was some people who were displaced to open this park, and that they were actually causing problems. And he was joking around saying, yeah, maybe there's a hillbilly out here who wanted to freak us out, scared everybody out, and we kind of said, yeah, right, and now maybe a total of 20 minutes after that bang happened and the people were gone, we're just kind of, they're outside the two open doors standing there, and it's getting cold in the van. I didn't want them to wake the kids to get it too cold, so I was like, guys, you probably should come on in and get back to sleep. And all of a sudden, just like that, we heard sounds from the ridge, which would be right in front of the open doors of the van. That would be that bottom left leg of the big horseshoe ridge. And our heads all three turned right over there, and you could just hear crunching, brush moving, rocks falling, just like somebody was scrambling down the hillside and knocking stuff loose and moving vegetation, crackling twigs. And then after about 10 or 15 more seconds, it got really loud. It was like really loud pounding steps. You could hear a thump, and then rocks and brush and the thump. I remember thinking, my goodness, what kind of a thing is walking on two legs that's that big? It sounded like a giant was walking down a flight of stairs real slowly, just boom, boom. But you could tell it was coming down that rock ledge, and it was moving down and towards the arc of that horseshoe. In other words, away from the back of our van. So it was coming from the left and moving around to the back on the right. You could just hear it. I think one of the guys shot the flashlight up, but you couldn't see anything but brush and little rock outcropping. I think he did that, but I can't really remember right now. But I think we did flash it up there. And the guys, we were just frozen. And then all of a sudden the guys eased into the van and got up into the front seats. And I closed those back doors so quietly. And there was not a sound. I started shaking. I was like, what is going on? Somebody is out here trying to mess with us, and we're in this van. And all of a sudden, just as soon as he got in that front seat, I swear, my husband turned the headlights on and pushed on the brake pedal so it would light up the area, but I didn't know he was going to do it. And I just, jumped up. All that light flashed on all at once, and I thought I was going to jump out of my skin. And we all started looking around. I realized what he was doing then, and because there was the scuffling and the breaking twigs and the rocks and all that got really loud, and it was like it was right next to us. I remember hearing rocks hitting the fire ring and hitting the pup tent. It was that close that stuff was getting shook loose from the ridge. And we were just looking around, and in the glow around us, off to that front right of the van, halfway up the ridge, just like where our ears were telling us it was coming from. The first place we looked was right up there, because that's where we heard the sounds coming from. And the lights from the old Volkswagen van lit up a pretty good thing left to right, a pretty good arc left to right. And that's when we saw about halfway up that ridge, about 25 feet up that ridge, just where the light barely reached what you would say is the legs of this thing. And only like 10 to maybe 12 feet from looking out the van doors, that close, but up, was this hairy person thing coming down in steps off that ridge, just like walking down the outcropping. I mean, all three of us were just like, I remember feeling like I was just going to crawl under the bench, crawl under the back seat and say, let's just pretend like we're not home. And I was just staring at it. I mean, we couldn't figure out what it was. I remember seeing the hair first, because in the light from the van's lights, the ends of the hair seemed to be silver tipped. And I guess that's where my brother got the idea of it being like a German Shepherd hair, almost sparkly in the light. Because it was so silver tipped at the edge, but the rest of him was pretty dark. As it came down, you could see more of it, and more of it got into the light, and I could see that it was really dark. It was a dark creature, but it had this silver streak down its back from its shoulders all the way down to its buttocks. And I couldn't see a tail. I didn't think there was a tail, because from what I could see, it was just kind of bent half over and using its arm to push brush out of the way and steady itself against the rock. But he never quit moving. He was constantly coming down and going away towards the top of that horseshoe of that ridge. And sometimes he'd be on four legs, and then he'd stand up and step down a couple steps. And so the closer he got, the more he stepped down, the more we could see him in the light. But the further he was getting away, the less I could see of the front of him. I remember just staring at the face, trying to see it, if it was I thought it was a person. It wasn't like people describe Sasquatch, like a giant football player. I would say he was about maybe 7 feet tall when he stood up. He was really tall. He was, I wouldn't say slim, but compared to what people say Sasquatch is, he was slim. He reminded me of if you had a really buff basketball player, but not giant shoulders or anything. But he did have this weird barrel chest that I guess I could describe it as if you look at a bulldog and he has that chest that comes out and then goes in to his waist, that stuck out in my mind, that chest. And that's when I started thinking, is that an animal? And I was just kind of like, is that an animal or is that a guy? And I realized he was completely covered with hair and there was no clothes. And he kind of turned a little bit. He made jerky head motions, and he turned. I remember when he first was coming down that ridge, he turned a little bit, and I saw that he didn't have any hair on his cheeks, on the side of his face, and he had kind of it's hard to tell because it was so dark and you're in the light of a dim sort of, Volkswagen van headlight, but I think he had gray skin, lighter gray skin. The crazy thing was he looked like a human. I didn't see his eyes, but it was just a dark triangle for eyes. But his nose wasn't a human nose and it wasn't a monkey nose. It was kind of a dog nose. It wasn't as long and pointed as a dog, but it was a square box snout. I would say maybe he weighed 250 pounds. When he went out of sight, and this whole descent didn't take very long at all, maybe 2 to 3 minutes from when we first heard the sound starting up at the top of the ridge until he was going away from us. I did notice the other weird thing was that when he turned, when he jerked his head back and forth looking at us and then looking back down, he had little ears on the side of his head, and I could just tell the outline of an ear, but the weird thing was he had little tufts of hair sticking up on the ear that made it look like, there's a cat, like a lynx or something that has those tufts of hair, or a bobcat has those tufts of hair up on it.
Right at the top of their ears.
Yeah, that's what I remember seeing on this ear. So I did not see a dog ear. And I can't say I saw a human ear. I just saw this spot in his fur, which my brain said was an ear. And I saw the tufts, and when he turned, I could see that tuft move. That was the weird thing. I was like, what? That's not a man, and that's not an animal. What the heck is that? And we didn't say a word. And then right when we lost sight of it, which would have been by the back windows of the van as it was heading towards the far back end of the road, which would be the top arc of that horseshoe ridge, right before we heard this big hoof and then a growl. I've been thinking about that it had to be pretty loud because we were closed up in the van and he was that far away. And yet it sounded like he was right outside the door. And it was a big hoof and then this really gravelly grrr. And that's when it finally struck me, that's some kind of animal. I was just like, oh my gosh, that's some wild animal. This is where the insanity hits. Now this is because, I gotta say, it's gotta be because one of them was 16 and the other one was 20, that they insanely my brother and my husband, opened the front doors of the van and jumped out. They jumped out after this growl and this menacing thing we just saw. They jumped out, stood in front of the van with their heads down, kind of like hiding and trying to see it better. And they were asking each other, what do you see? What do you see? Do you see it? Do you see where it went? Do you know where it went? And they had the doors open, the van doors open, and that blocked the light that was going back there. So if you could see anything, if they'd shut the doors and gotten away from the light, they might have seen something, but they were cowering in the front looking out. And just as suddenly as that bang happened on the van, a complete hailstorm of gravel hit. I mean, it hit that car. It mainly hit the open driver's side door. It mainly hit that. It was definitely aimed at them. And it came from back where that creature was, from back there. And I mean, it was like it was like gravel and dust. And it was, I would say, 3 or 4 buckets full, all at once, just in a huge shower. It's just a rainstorm of rock. Those guys jumped in that van so fast and started it up, backed out, and we were burning down that road as fast as a Volkswagen van with like 60 horsepower can go. But we were out of there. I remember not ever looking anything but out that back window the whole time because I expected we were going to be attacked. And, I started thinking, is there more than one of these things out there? And this whole thing took from the moment I laid down until this moment was maybe 30 minutes. It was all that fast. I mean, we were just shocked and stunned. We didn't have time to react until the next thing happened. And we're trying to figure that out, and then the next thing happened. And so it was about 4 a.m. We left the park, drove for a long time, and got out, I think it was Rogers, Arkansas again, where we found this little general store, and they had street lights, and we pulled in there and just parked there. And we get into this parking lot, and we turn off the van, and we're drinking water, and we're just like we had run the whole way ourselves. And my brother starts saying, I think that was a bear. But actually, it looked more like a German Shepherd. And I'm like, Bruce, a 7-foot-tall walking German Shepherd? And then he'd shake his head and say, well, I don't know. And then my husband said, well, it had to have hands to throw all that rock. And then we were talking about how the hair seemed to be like a German Shepherd's hair, I guess, mottled patching, but that mainly the silver down the back and the silver tips that kind of glittered. But about 5 a.m., we passed out. 6 o'clock, the store opened up, and the people they pulled in the driveway, a man and a woman, and I was feeding the kids and, changing diapers and giving them a little bath and everything, and I was just wiped out. And I needed to go in and get a few items, so I went in, and, I'm sure I look like a wreck. I look like a crazy woman because I'd been through a war zone, and I walked in and I asked them a couple of questions, like, any reports of some mangy bears or anything with, how about, and I was just postulating all these animals, do you have any rabid animals? No. They just looked at me like I was nuts, and we left. And as we were leaving, we went to the ranger station on the way out. This was like 7 a.m. that morning. We went out. We had paid for 3 days, and we were in there. We told the ranger about the incident. And he was like, what? And I think he told us he was from Illinois or something. And he said, no, I just came down here for the opening of the park and stuff. And he said, well, I'll go up there and check out the site. And we said, just keep the pup tent and the sleeping bag. We're not going back up there to get it. It's yours. And he was like, wow, well, I'll go up there with you. And we said, nope, we're going home. And we drove back to Leavenworth that day. And my husband was still with pneumonia, so we shared driving and so forth. And, we never said, we barely spoke. At first we'd speak. We'd do nothing but jabber about it, and then there'd be quiet. And one of us would say, well, what about, and then we'd jabber about it, and there'd be quiet. And then just before we got home, my husband and my brother said, whatever we do, don't tell anybody about this, because they're going to think we're on drugs. And he had a really good job, and my brother Bruce was going to go to veterinary school, and he had just got accepted early. He just graduated early from high school. I had graduated early from high school, and he didn't want anything to mess it up. And he said, if this gets out, and you know how these things get out, everybody's like, oh, that crazy Bruce, you know what he said? And so he said, please, let's make a pact. Let's don't say anything about it. And I was like, who would you tell anyway? You know what? What are you going to do? I felt weird talking to the ranger about it.
And especially back in those days, you got made fun of much more quickly than today.
They just said, what are you smoking, and we were all young, so, we were figuring, oh, man, they're going to really think we're crazy. So we didn't say anything. We kept it quiet. We didn't say a word. In fact, I just keep trying to push it back. And then I started, over the years hearing about Bigfoot and stuff, and I thought, now that must have been what it was, a North American ape. But no, he didn't look like the Bigfoot. I've never seen anything, any picture, any depiction like the thing we saw. And until, I'm fascinated by the Bigfoot thing only because I've been trying to figure out, make this creature man thing that we experience fit into some kind of little category in my head so I can explain it. It never had. And then I was listening to your show, and then I made a comment online, and there were some links to the Dogman thing. I know in the back of my mind I'd heard about Dogman or something, but I always thought werewolf, because I think that's what I'd heard about was a werewolf. And I knew this was no werewolf. I wouldn't even have a million years have said this was a werewolf or even a dog, even though my brother kept saying, I think it's like a German Shepherd. It was, if you had not seen the head, you would have said it was a very hairy wild man. But having seen that head and the tufts on the ears and everything, there's no way that was a man. No way it was a human at all. It was about 30 years after that. I was talking to my dad, and he grew up in logging camps, mainly around Mineral, Washington. I don't know if you know where that is, but it's around Mount Rainier area. His dad was a railroadman, and they loaded the trains and pulled them out and everything. And I mentioned to him, I said, Dad, did Bruce ever tell you anything about that camping trip in Arkansas we went to? And we came home early, and Charlie, my husband, was really sick. And he said, well, he did say something about it. He said that it was a bad camp out, and the whole thing was bad, and there was a very large creature and rock throwing. And he had asked my dad, I guess, about, can a bear do they scoop gravel at you, and throw things? And Dad said that when he was growing up in those logging camps around Mount Rainier, that he was told as a little kid, like 6, 7 or so, you never went out into the tree line. You always stayed close to the camp. You just did not step into the tree line because the boss of the woods would come and get you, or the old man of the woods. That's what he called it. He said, they'll take you as a slave, or they'll eat you. And he said the men working the camps would tell these stories, and he would listen to them. When they thought he was asleep, he'd be listening to them, and he said, they're cannibals, And I said, but Dad, I don't think what we saw was one of them, And he said, but there are cannibals in the woods. And he was a totally serious retired military man. I mean, totally serious. For me to hear him say that, I was like, what? Is this my dad? He's a drill instructor, a survival trainer. For him to say that, I was just like, okay. Yeah. And he said, that's why when we go in the woods, we make lots of noise. I said, well, yeah, because of the bear and everything. He said, no, I'm not afraid of bears. No. No. And that's why I taught you guys how to set up a camp. You never leave your back to this and blah, blah, blah. And after he told me all that, I was thinking about it. And exactly how he camped. We camped in a perfect not way to camp, the way he taught us not to. We were backs to the wall, and if there were 1 or 2 or more of those creatures, and they'd wanted to, I'm sure they'd have had us. Because we were in that little horseshoe, it was like a setup. And I remember hearing another one of your guests talking and saying that he felt like he'd been set up. Had we known there was an old man of the woods or a boss of the woods or a cannibal there, we never would have pulled in there in the first place, and we would have parked differently secondarily, and we would have gone in with weapons. Wouldn't have taken an infant, 2 infants with us, and a sick man. We were like prey. The weak, the young, the old. We were just sitting there, and the more I thought about it as I was writing it out, I was like, oh. He did absolutely everything you never wanted to do. And I often wondered about the people who boogied out and left their pop-up camper there. I know they left because of that. There's no 2 ways about it. They left right during this incident. I often wondered what happened to them. Because that creature, we saw the shadow, before we knew what it was, we saw the shadow go behind our van and went down there. The next thing we know, off to our far left, so he must have circled around the front, got to that lower left leg of the horseshoe, but he started down the ridge. So that's when I started thinking maybe there was 2 of them. One that was coming down the ridge and one that was already down there.
When you were describing it hitting your van,
yeah,
I almost wonder if it came up and it slapped your van, or it banged on your van. It wasn't a rock. It was actually one coming up.
Like. Yeah,
that's
an open-handed slap.
That's right. What we thought after the guys got out and looked, and there was absolutely no damage. And that was just impossible to us that there was no damage because the impact was like a meteorite. You know what I mean? There had to be damage, and there was not a dent, not a scratch, nothing. So you're right. It was like an open-handed slap and run.
I know a lot of the flute players talk about the rock throwing as being playful, but in your situation, it's not, actually I can't think of any situation that seems like it's playful, but it just seems like the same behavior over and over and over again that we hear.
It's a challenge.
Yeah, it's absolutely.
It was obviously a challenge. It was trying to provoke, you into an action, and you guys left, which was, I think, the right course of action in that case. On the nose, that you said wasn't really like a snout, like a dog snout. Was it remotely like a baboon type nose? Was it anything like that?
I didn't see it well enough. I really can't say. And the drawing that I sent you, the picture of it coming down the hill, that's mainly what I saw. I drew the close-up after what my husband and my brother said.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're the ones who saw that face. I saw the face of the smaller drawing of it in the background. So that nose in the background, it's just, I noticed it was different. It was a box on the face. And
kind of protruding.
They told me, yeah, protruding, but not coming to a point and
right.
Not having a snout like a pig. I drew what what they told me, and it was kind of a elongated, well, like if you took a man's nose and upper lip and puffed it out about 2.5, 3, 4 inches and squared it off at the end.
Kind of like a baboon.
Yeah, so, yeah, not apish, but when you see those baboons with a great big bulbous nose, I don't know what kind of ape it is, but it comes out and comes to a bulb. If that was squared off, that would be what I would guess.
I think that's the proboscis monkey.
Yeah, you're right. If it wasn't quite that long, and if it was squared off, not bulbous at the end, it definitely had hair on the sides of this nose, like a dog's, really short, because you could see the hair glisten. And it was unusual hair. It was like a German Shepherd's hair, where it started out dark at the body and then got light at the tips, because it really, you can see it move. You can see his muscles move, and when the waves of muscles move, the tips would sparkle.
Yeah, I was going to say, a lot of your descriptions is the same descriptions that Will and I get as far as what the dog man looks like, and they tend to be more violent, or it seems like the encounters that we get from them is they tend to be a little bit more violent or a little bit more aggressive than your typical Sasquatch like we have here in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, and
But a lot of your descriptions are right on, though. Exactly what I've heard.
Wow. Well, it's kind of reassuring, to know that.
Yeah, and people are really just starting to open up about this particular type of creature. We get a lot of the type, of course, the type 1, the Patterson type Sasquatch, and the type 2. But this one is something that people, I think it's been around, for a long time. But since we've been talking about it, people are starting to open up a little more about these.
I would think it's easier to misidentify as something else.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you just kind of don't want to think, is that what?
Yeah, that's definitely, Bigfoot's bad enough, but if I see something like this that's different, you really want to suppress that.
Yeah, exactly.
Funny. Will and I were just joking about that. We're like, Sasquatch is bad enough, but this dogman thing really creeps the hell out of us.
It does. I don't know why, but, because Sasquatch is more elusive, and like you said, it isn't always on the attack, but this thing was always on the attack. He was always aggressive. He wasn't shy. He came down that side of that hill, and he didn't care if we had the car lights on, or, He wasn't retiring back into the bushes so we wouldn't see it. He was definitely on the attack. He was on the march, and he just, and his head was, another thing was his head turned. I've heard a lot of your guests say that, the head doesn't turn, the whole body turns. This definitely had a twitchy head. His head was twitching like an animal.
The typical Sasquatch, the type 1s, and I think the type 2 also, the head's lower set into the shoulders, like a gorilla, so they're more apt to turn the whole upper body and not have the range of motion that, say, we do with our neck.
Right. And that makes sense. And I always knew that was very different, too. And I kept thinking, golly, maybe it was a anomaly, just a really bad mix of genes out there, that just happened to be.
Our friend, our government insider, Mr. Black, assured me, I questioned him, he assured me that is a separate species.
Wow. And when I saw, after I looked at these sites, the Michigan, or no, is it Wisconsin or Michigan? Anyway, it's a Midwest thing. I wondered, have you guys heard of are these out here in the Pacific Northwest? Do people report them everywhere? Or is
it typically seems to be within a 500-mile range of the Mississippi River drainage system.
That would make sense. This would be really close close in there.
Right. Your dad mentioned the term boss of the woods, and I've heard so much over my many years involved in this that I tend to forget things. And like you said, sometimes when you're writing down something, your memory gets jogged. Or if I'm in a conversation, my memory gets jogged, and you jog my memory with that term. And I've known about that term for a long time, but when I was growing up, I grew up south of Puyallup, Washington, so was familiar with, knew a lot of logging families and was around that as a kid growing up. And I remember hearing on and off, some of the men use that term, but I just thought, as a kid you think, oh, that's just, the boss of the logging crew. But they would use the term boss of the woods, and it never occurred to me what they were talking about.
Yeah, Dad just absolutely just blew my mind. He just said, well,
those loggers, they never talked about those things to outsiders.
No. Again, they would think you were drinking. Or, you prove it. Unless you had proof, I don't think he would ever have mentioned it. But he clearly said, they're the boss of the woods, and that's what they told us. You stay away, the boss of the woods. And the funniest thing I was going to say is, he said, or they'll take you as a slave, or they'll just eat you. And I thought, what would they do? How do you slave for a Sasquatch?
I think
I don't want to know.
That may have come from the Indians.
Oh.
But it's probably more likely they would eat you.
Yeah, that's what I think. Yeah, the slave part would have been the good ending. But years later I'm thinking, what would a Sasquatch? What does he need a slave for? But I remember I wanted to mention other people saying that they don't like dark windows. Was it you, Wes, that was saying that? You don't like the windows at night?
No, I think it was our last. Yeah, it was the last guest we had on. And he didn't like windows at night, dark windows.
And that really struck me because I think looking back, I think that's when it started for me. Those dark windows are creepy. Well,
after I had my first encounter, I was a little nervous around windows too at night. And I would stay away from open windows. Yeah.
It's a very vulnerable feeling. You're just like, okay, if I see it, then what?
Well, it's a feeling like you're on the inside of the fish bowl.
Yeah, that's what it is. I'm in the zoo.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, no. So you say that you believe the wildlife is getting bolder. Do you think that then these North American apes are getting bolder?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, our behavior has changed a great deal from, look what people were doing 30 plus years ago. I mean, I remember as a kid taking my 22 or 12 gauge out, and shooting birds or whatever. My dad would tell me to shoot whatever animals came in the yard because they might be rabid.
Right, exactly.
And people kind of stopped doing that. It became a thing that was sort of a negative if you went out and did it. So now animals aren't as afraid of people as they used to be.
That's a really good point. You're very right. That's probably got a lot to do with it. But it does seem like there are more reported sightings, and I don't think it's just because people think it's okay to do it now. I think it's because they're either bolder or there are more of them, or people have infringed on their territory and now are seeing more of them.
Well, there's a combination there, and like the numbers, I think the numbers are actually increasing, and the reason I say that is because now you're in Oregon, right?
Yeah.
Now you know about, you've seen plenty of logged areas, and everybody thinks
we have them all right around us.
It's just gone. Well, look at all the brush that grows up after they've logged an area.
Yep.
All the leafy brush that normally wouldn't be there because the timber would block the sunlight out for that stuff.
Yep.
Well, that stuff has created so much food for deer and other animals that eat that kind of plant life that I don't know about Oregon, but I know in Washington, and I'm sure it's probably the same, they've called the deer population an infestation.
It is.
Because
it is an infestation.
Hunting is less, and there's just a huge population boom in those animals. We know if deer have exploded in population numbers like that, so have all the other animals, which means the predators have also increased.
That makes sense.
And that's why we're seeing more cougars and things like that, so the Sasquatch population has to be corresponding also.
Yeah, because I remember my dad saying, when an area is predated, the predators drop in number.
Right.
It's just a natural thing. They just drop in number. So that's the opposite is true. And we certainly have a bazillion deer and elk. I mean, there's no lack of
anybody
wildlife.
who lives in the Northwest can see the logged areas, and not the fresh ones, but the ones that have been, growing up for a little while, how thick they are with leafy vegetation.
Oh, yeah.
And it just makes all the herbivore populations explode.
Yeah, that really rings true. I see it here, that's for sure. There's a lot of open meadowland now, and it's blackberries and shrubs. And then there you go, you have more berries. And those areas also make better hiding places for deer and such. Because it's harder for predators to get in at them, number one, without making noise, and just the tangle of brush is harder for them to get through, so they have an easier chance to escape. So it's done a lot of things to the animal population. So I really think that the Sasquatch population has to be getting larger. Yeah, it's just totally off balance. This whole talking about this thing, when I wrote you, I told you it was almost cathartic. I mean, it was almost like reliving the whole thing. I mean, I felt wiped out when I got done writing it. It was just like an emotional, there it's out, you know.
It's a release, right?
Yeah, a release. Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many people have contacted me, and oftentimes they want to remain anonymous because their jobs or some exposure, but you know, just getting it off their shoulders is enough. And I always say this, but I think it's easier for somebody who's had an encounter to talk to somebody else that's had an encounter.
Oh, most definitely.
Rather than somebody who hasn't, because they can't really relate to it.
Yeah, or you know, I picture they'd just be nodding their head saying, really, really, really.
Yeah,
and you
like
don't
Wes
know.
and I now, we've had very different types of encounters, but we've still, you know, been very close to these creatures. So, it's almost, when you talk to somebody else that's had an encounter, it's sort of like that instant rapport. You just start, you know, you can just tell, you know,
yeah.
And you start sharing those experiences, and like, yeah, you know, I saw that, or yeah, I saw this, or this happened, and it is a release, though. It really, it's helpful to get that off your shoulders.
Well, when I heard Wes and Woody's account, I remember really identifying with that emotion. Really, I could just put myself in their place, and I thought, you know, this was not a fuzzy, warm, let's
I'm just
pet
very
the
glad
Wookie.
I wasn't in their shoes.
No kidding. And that's exactly, you know, how we felt. We felt that same confusion, freezing. Like I said, we went from 1 second to the next just trying to figure out what the last second was. And we were just literally just frozen, just going, what is that? What's happening now? What do we do? And the terror, you know, it was a long 30 minutes. And it's lasted 42 years. It was a terrifying thing. It was not a fun thing.
No, I don't think they're ever fun experiences.
I know, and I see everybody, you know, you see the ads and things in the shows where they're racing around the woods hoping to find one, hoping to see one, and I'm thinking,
I think
I'm hoping they don't find me.
Yeah, I think there are a bunch of damn kooks who go out and act like that.
I do too. I think that's insane, you know, people jump off bridges.
It's a very naive approach.
That's it. That's the word for it. It's very naive. Very naive. Ugh.
I really wanted to thank you for coming on and sharing your encounter with us.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, you guys, and if it helps somebody else, I mean, if someone else out there is saying, I don't know what I saw, but it wasn't that, you know, maybe they'll get that moment of aha that I got.
Well, great encounter, and we certainly enjoyed hearing it.
Well, thanks a lot, guys. I really enjoy the program.
Oh, thank you so much.
And I'll be listening.
All right, Pam. Well, you have yourself a great night.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Pam.
Bye-bye.
Well, she did a good job.
Yeah, it was good. It was a good encounter. It was a scary encounter.
It was. It was very good.
One thing that made me wonder is almost if that thing was trying to lure them out.
You know, I tend to think that's what was going on.
I mean, trying to get the two guys to follow it or follow, because, you know, the minute they stepped out, the rocks came.
We've heard that before, where these things have tried to lead, you know, people off, you know, probably into some sort of ambush. I mean, the slap on the van could have been, you know, that initial, that sort of a challenge. That was that first challenge. And then, you know, it coming down in the open like that was a challenge, just like the one you guys saw, you know, kind of brazenly up there. You know, all these elements, we've heard these things many times. Yeah.
I know when she first mentioned it, slapping, or it sounded like a softball size thing hitting the side of the van, the first thing I thought of was, I bet it's slapping the side of the van. Like you hear them slap the side of houses and bang on houses.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. We've heard that how many times now?
Yeah, every time. I mean, it's so common. It's unbelievable. But, you know, these dogmen, I mean, that one didn't turn into a violent encounter. It's probably because they left, but a lot of these dogman encounters seem to be more violent. Yeah, that's what seems to be the norm on these. It's not never just a chance encounter. They look at you, you look at them, they wander off. It always involves some sort of a violent situation, or at least leading into a violent situation. Yeah, like they're coming for a fight. Right. Yeah. Makes you wonder what the other people saw when they took off. Yeah, and they left their camper. That's something we didn't ask her. Well, she didn't know. They left before anybody came back, so I wonder if they came back for their camper. Yeah, who knows? That's crazy, though, that they would just take off. That's fear right there. That's not... that's primal fear. Yeah, that's primal fear right there, when you get in your truck and you just drive off, leave your camper. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for